Hello, welcome to Scholars Hub at Home. I'm Julie Lafford, Executive Director for Alumni Engagement here at York University. Thanks for joining us today for our lecture, COVID-19 Lockdown, the 1-year anniversary. This webinar is part of our Scholars Hub at Home series and features educational lectures by academics and researchers from York. We're pleased to be able to bring these events online to allow even more alumni and friends to hear from some of the university's leading scholars. I want to begin today by acknowledging the land York's campuses are built on. As this event is virtual and we're not all gathered in the same space, I recognize that the following land acknowledgement might not be for the lands you're currently on. And if that's the case, please take the responsibility to acknowledge the territory you are on and the current treaty holders. As a member of the York University community, I recognize that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located, which precede the establishment of York University. York University acknowledges its presence on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Takaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. We acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. I am truly grateful for the opportunity to live and work on Treaty 13. For today's event, I'm pleased to welcome a panel of 4 York faculty members who've each been recognized with awards of excellence by Ontario's Minister of Colleges and Universities for their commitment to guiding the province of Ontario through the pandemic. Recipients of this award have demonstrated exceptional dedication to the people of Ontario, taking action to support those in need and working to bring an end to the pandemic while kickstarting an equitable recovery. As usual, this lecture will be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel for you to share with your family and friends. Today, we'll also feature an extended Q&A portion with you in the audience, so we look forward to your questions and discussion later in the webinar. For more information about Scholars Hub at Home series, as well as all of our other virtual events, visit our website, yorku.ca/alumni and friends. So let's get started. We'd like to get to know our audience a bit better, as always, and we always ask a question before each lecture. Today, our question is, what do you hope to get out of this session today? So if you're viewing this on Zoom, instead of a poll, you can just use that Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to type in your answer about what you'd like to learn. And if you're watching this on Facebook, you can feel free to use the comment section there to give us your answers as well. So I'll just give you all a moment to enter some of your feedback, and I'm really interested in what you want to learn today. All right, insights into the future, says Rob. How soon we can move forward. I'm sure we're all eager to learn that. People have questions about vaccines, lots of very good questions about vaccines, how we're comparing to other countries in the way that we're handling the pandemic. That's great, thanks everybody. So if you need help with the Zoom webinar at any point, feel free to click on that same Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter your question there. Our team's in the background here to help you. That same button can be used to submit questions for our speakers during the Q&A period. And for those of you watching on Facebook, you can submit questions there as well, and the team will send them my way for the moderated Q&A at the end. So I said before, the talk's titled COVID-19 Lockdown, the 1-year anniversary. And we have 4 panelists with us today. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Stephen Hoffman, who's the Director of the Global Strategy Lab and Professor of Global Health, Law, and Political Science. Dr. Dasantila Mikotra, Associate Professor in the Department of Biology in the Faculty of Science. Dr. Murat Kristal, Director and Master of Business Analytics and Director of Masters of Management in Artificial Intelligence at the Schulich School of Business. And Dr. Jianhong Wu, who's the Director of Advanced Disaster Emergency and Rapid Response Simulation and Professor of Mathematics and Statistics in the Faculty of Science. So we welcome all of you and thank you for being here today. You can go ahead and turn on your cameras now. We'll start today by asking each of you to just give a brief introduction of yourselves, speak about your award-winning research. So Dr. Hoffman, we'll start with you. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you, Julie. And I think it's fantastic that you've and the team have been organizing the Scholar Hub series at home. I think it's so important right now that we have these kind of opportunities for social connection, despite having to be physically distant. So a big thank you. So the work for which I was awarded this award from the Minister of Colleges and Universities in Ontario links to my role in leading the development of the United Nations research roadmap for the COVID-19 recovery. This was work that was done upon invitation of the UN Deputy Secretary General. And it was out of recognition that, yes, COVID-19, of course, is a pandemic of a virus, but it's also been a pandemic of socioeconomic consequences and a pandemic of inequities. And so as a result, that means that we, as we think of how we respond to and how we recover from this unprecedented global health threat that we're all living through right now, we need to be thinking of this pandemic in its multiple contexts. So in that work, what we did is we were invited to lead a global participatory process. This happened last summer. And the thinking was that, yes, we were in the middle of trying to figure out, okay, how do we respond to this outbreak? What kind of procedures need to be put in place? Will there be a vaccine that works? We, at the same time, needed to identify what knowledge needs will we have when we get to a future recovery so that we can make sure that that recovery allows us to move forward. And so in the world, there's this framework called the Sustainable Development Goals. It's essentially the framework that the world, all countries in the world, have agreed to guide their development over the coming decade. And so the thinking was that, okay, if we want to reach those goals by their 2030 deadline, we need to make sure that we're not able to just go back to the way things were, because actually the world was not working for many people, if not most people who live on this planet. But how do we actually take advantage of any opportunity for more transformative changes that any kind of shocking event like a pandemic presents in order to actually leapfrog in terms of and achieve a kind of transformative future that would enhance equity, resilience, and sustainability. And so that's what this task was. It has since been published. It was released in November. If you Google UN Research Roadmap COVID-19, it'll be the first hit. But essentially what that does is it identifies the top knowledge needs for a better recovery. And the goal is that it will be used by research funders and researchers and other institutions as a guide to help prioritize the kind of research that's needed. Already, we have seen quite a lot of pickup from research funders around the world. Various funders have made announcements about how they're going to be providing funding to researchers to do work in these spaces. But also we're seeing it help governments, even beyond the research process, just making sure that they're thinking about the things that they need to be thinking about right now in order to prepare for those months and years ahead of us. So it was really quite an honor to do that. I think it's an example of how we do research at York University. We're on a particular campus, but actually our reach can be global and by working through global networks. And it was quite an honor to do that work. And I look forward to the conversation with all of you during this seminar. Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Hoffman. Dr. Mikotra, can you go next, please?
Yes, thank you, Julie. It's a great pleasure actually to be in this event, as well as to be among the other awardees of this award. So the award was given to me for the contribution to make the public and as well as educate the public to make the public aware of it, as well as educate the public about the some of the preventative measures that work quite well in terms of mitigating the transmission of COVID disease. Including myself here at the beginning of the pandemic, there was a big fear in terms of how the disease was transmitted, and a lot of risks were assessed, such as, for example, contamination through touching surfaces, or including here the respiratory droplets, and what were the sort of the best means that were easy to follow by the public in general to mitigate the transmission of the disease. And for me, actually, it came natural to be part of that group of scientists that made an effort to ease the fears. I mean, personally included, I was quite concerned as to how to avoid getting the COVID-19. But so it came natural due to my involvement in microbial infections, in particular bacterial infections. In my lab, we work with some of the superbugs that have become quite problematic in terms of treating them with any of the available antibiotics. In my community, actually, has become quite important to educate the public at large as to how bacterial infections spread and how that leads to the evolution of microorganisms such as bacteria, and to the problems such as inability to treat these infections. So as soon as the first opportunity arose in terms of bringing my own thinking and opinion as to how the masks can actually be an easy, relatively easy means to follow and to mitigate the transmission. In the lab, we use masks quite often, especially when we deal with some of the superbugs. So, and I do teach microbiology and to nursing students. So, as I was participating on this discussion as to how masks contribute to decreasing the number of the cases, it was pretty much like teaching my nursing students significance of hand hygiene, face mask, as well as being aware of the surrounding, whether you're dealing with patients or otherwise healthy individuals. So, so obviously I was personally invested in participating on this discussion and bringing my own knowledge and expertise, but I was pleased to see that public actually was quite eager to really learn and follow these measures. So, and I'm pleased to be part of this meeting with the purpose of hopefully addressing more questions. So vaccines have been wonderful in terms of easing up a little bit the fears as to where the end of this pandemic will come, but as well as has raised some concerns, and I'm happy to actually address the questions that the audience would have.
Thanks so much for that. Dr. Kristal, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, thank you very much for having us. Our project was more of a forecasting about the number of confirmed COVID cases. At the beginning of the pandemic, as you might remember, it was very hard to get data, but it was also very hard to look into forecasting tools that would inform the public on how many confirmed cases that a region would have. So we worked as a group, 3 of us, at the Deloitte Cognitive Analytics and Visualization Lab, and we created a dashboard. And in this dashboard, it's still alive, and it updates itself every day. And we do the forecasts every day to give a better outlook. And the idea is to get the data from the Johns Hopkins database using GitHub, and then provide a forecast for the next 5 days. Now, this forecasting tool is not a long-term forecasting tool. It's only 5 days, but it's very accurate. And as a result, the decision makers or the public can literally get into this dashboard. It's very easy to use it, and then see what's going to happen in Ontario It's on Wednesday, so you will have an idea of what's going to happen in Ontario on Monday next week. That was what we did with our dashboard.
Thank you for that. I have some more questions for you later. And last but not least, Dr. Wu, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Julian, for having me. And it's really a pleasure to meet your alumni audience in this special way during the COVID time. And it's been a pleasure to be part of these outstanding colleagues among the campus. I honestly don't know why I was nominated, and I was awarded this special recognition. And in my capacity as a Canada Research Chair and National NSEC Sanofi Industry Research Chair in Vaccine Mathematics, Modeling and Manufacturing, and also based on my experience of leading national team to build the mathematical model and analysis to inform the decision making during the SARS time and during the 2009 pandemic influenza time. So I was asked by a number of national research centers, including the Fields Institute, the National Research Council, and the Public Health Agency of Canada, to build a national team that is now called National COVID-19 Rapid Response Task Force. It's based really at York University, and I was invited to the Ontario the modeling consensus table. This I don't feel just explain why I was nominated. I have been working on modeling infectious disease outbreak for many years. My funding has been supported by the university, supported by the Ontario government, by the Canadian federal government. So the work is paid by the taxpayers in Ontario, in Canada. So I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. So the only thing I feel, if something needs to be recognized, it must be the outstanding quality of research by a larger team of our graduate students and postdocs in Lyon, in my lab, and in Addison. So we have about 12 graduate student postdocs who have been mentored by a number of my colleagues, including Ali Ashgarin from Addison, Professor Michael Chen from the Department of Mathematics and Science and Statistics. (724) since last February, they have been providing the mathematical modeling analysis to inform the risk, to make the nearcasting and forecasting of the COVID-19 Ontario in the country. And they have been providing the evaluation and quantification for the effectiveness of different interventions to inform the decision-making in Ontario in almost every stage of social distance escalation, social distance, public health major relaxation, reopening, and recovery. So I just feel lucky. If something should be deserved, it's recognition must be this team, and they are really the hero of the university.
Thanks, Dr. Wu. I think it's clear to everyone in the audience, if not to you, why everybody on this panel deserved the award. I'm super pleased to have you all here today. And there's a lot of complementarity between your work. So I'm looking forward to the discussion very much. And I am going to start the Q&A portion of today's event with a question that actually was pre-submitted in advance by one of our members of the audience. And it is, and it's for all of you, so we'll just take turns. How has lockdown impacted your research? And Dr. Hoffman talked a little bit about this before. What kind of support for your research do you expect from government and private sector? Who'd like to take that first? Thanks, Dr. Hoffman.
Great. Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, it's very clear that a pandemic like this has very much affected a lot of people's research across the country. You know, this is the moment when we need science to get us through this pandemic. And it's exactly these kind of conditions make it very difficult then to actually do the science that we are all counting on to get through the pandemic. I think though it's affected some labs more than others. I'm very lucky, so I lead a social science lab at York University. It's called the Global Strategy Lab. By a lab, what we mean is we bring a scientific lens to bear on how do countries work together to address transnational health threats like pandemics. But because it's a dry lab, not a wet lab, it means we were actually able to transition quite smoothly. We've been using Zoom and other information communication technologies for quite some time. Of course, some things you just need to be together to really get things through. You know, physical space can be transformative for bringing out that kind of brainstorming, that out of the box thinking that allows for us to make advances. In some respects, it's that space that can be a little bit of the magic sauce to make things really happen. But of course, we don't have that, and we've had to come up with other mechanisms because it's been a year, at least since I've been in my lab space. I think in terms of government supports, you know, in Canada, I think we can be quite proud of the very rapid response to COVID-19 from our research agencies. So Canada mounted the fastest of the governments around the world. It mounted the fastest research response to COVID-19 of any country. Now, fastest doesn't mean biggest, and it doesn't mean best, but I think actually it is a source of pride and should be a source of pride for all Canadians. Of course, there's gaps though, and so some of the funding from the Canadian government has come out in different waves. Some has been focused on particular areas related to COVID-19. Others have been just supports to ensure that projects can just be sustained, including all the projects not related to COVID-19. Because of course, people are still being affected by diabetes, by heart disease, by the range of factors that we all care about. So having that continuity, and there's funding that has been made available to do it, is very important. Yeah, I'll leave it there for the others to chime in as well.
Thank you. Dr. Mikotra, did you have something to add?
Yes, actually. So in the same way as Dr. Hoffman mentioned that the impact has been quite large when it comes to the research. In particular, my lab is a wet lab, meaning that we have to do it physically. I have to be in the lab and do the experiments. And at the same time, I have to be mindful of the risks that the lab members face when they come to the lab and go back to their homes as they have families and so on. At the same time, we have used this time to sort of take a stock really in terms of our own research, but also the contributions that our own research can have on such situations. As I indicated earlier, we do work on bacterial infections, which have become a big concern as well. And one thing that sort of I was happy of and contributing in terms of my knowledge to educating the population at large as to mitigation measures is that these organisms evolved, and we are quite part of it in terms of contributing at their evolution. But also we have to understand that just because we humans can come up with sort of new ways, drugs to combat bacterial or in general microbial infections, we have to be mindful of our own actions. So in this way, actually, we in the lab, we have used this time to just reflect as to how research can contribute to more sort of everyday, either educating the public, but also contributing to the solutions rather than just, in general, carrying out our research. And as Dr. Hoffman mentioned, actually, I was quite pleased with the speed at which the government actually acted on making sure through the funding agencies, making sure that the research wasn't impacted as much. We got my research is funded by MCERT and CHR, so we got assurances that whatever delay there would be one way or the other mitigated. And obviously the university tried their best to ensure that the safety and health of the workers in the university is a priority, but also enabling one way or the other the research to continue at some level. For me, it's quite pleasing to see actually the York alumni being strong and quite interested as to what we do in general, addressing their questions and concern. in a way, but also being proactive as to what they can do. So as I've seen in Faculty of Science, there's been a lot of contribution coming from, York alumni. So I am pleased, and certainly there is more to learn as to what goes on at York. So I'm happy to sort of use in the future those coming events to show off what we do and trigger some interest, hopefully.
That's great, thank you. Yeah, we definitely have a very inquisitive and thoughtful alumni community that joins us on regular basis. Dr. Wu, did you want to address the question?
Yeah, sure, yes. I have a dry lab. Actually, my asset is really a larger team of graduate students and postdocs. I've considered myself very lucky that before the pandemic, the university, NSEC, and Sanofi Pasteur has been funding a larger project on vaccine mathematics and modeling. So we were in a position to be able to mobilize this team and refocus on the issues that is important to the public. My concern is after the pandemic and the funding, the desire for funding this kind of activity might decrease, and then we'll not be in a position that we can mobilize a larger pool of expertise as we have been doing now. So Steve is right. I think the Canadian government has been funding COVID-19 research very aggressively, and this is a good sign. But I think this funding support for our young students should be sustained.
Thank you. Dr. Kristal, did you want to add anything?
We are a dry lab, and interestingly, one of the things I guess we are going to touch upon is this digital transformation that is happening. I mean, we are all in Zoom right now talking, right? We are not in physical. That's one sign of digital transformation. Our lab, our infrastructure is actually built upon cloud. When we were designing the lab initially, we designed our infrastructure where we do the computations, where we store the data, everything. We designed it over the cloud. So when we had to stay home, we are staying home, but we were able to reach out our machines and everything via the internet, right? So other than seeing people in person, nothing much changed for us. But it will create, this pandemic will create more research opportunities for us in terms of how organizations are changing, whether profit, not for profit, how they're adapting, and how digitization or digital transformation is helping organizations.
Thank you. Now I have some questions that are specific for each of you, and I'm actually gonna start with Dr. Kristal. Tell us a little bit about how artificial intelligence and analytics have shaped our world during the pandemic.
Big time. Like, I mean, even in the research in the, when they were developing the vaccinations, they used online research, they used Google facilities and everything. That changed the world. That's one thing. Like, that's like vaccination, very solid impact, right? But it also changed the way we live our lives. We cannot touch, we cannot congregate, we cannot get together, and yet we are talking to each other, communicating with each other, and we are working. And there is a backbone of infrastructure that enables that. And every time that you do something that is electronic, it means that the data is stored, whether you believe in it or not. Everything that we do has an electronic shadow or an electronic footprint to that. And that is being used for by organizations. And that is going to, it will have certain negative impacts, and it will have certain positive impacts. That's why the next thing in AI will be responsible AI, right? How AI will be used ethically, responsibly for the benefit of the public. rather than for selfish reasons. That is becoming a big thing, the responsible AI, and we are going to hear more about that. But this digital transformation, out of companies that we talk, they're talking about, you know, we knew it was coming, but we chose not to do anything, or we were waiting for it. And all of a sudden, when the lockdown begins, you're forced to respond to this digitization. That's how AI and analytics are helping. And then the minute that you are, getting the data, someone will crunch the numbers, someone will crunch the data, and then come up with solutions to the problems or answers to the questions.
Thank you very much. So we'll stick with the topic of data, and my next question is for Dr. Wu. Tell us how mathematical modeling has contributed to COVID-19 management. Oh, you're muted still.
All right. Yeah, this is very good topic following the Murat's discussions, the Kristal's discussions, and I feel mathematics is a tool that allow us to integrate all the information from different sources. Just Dr. Kristal just mentioned, now because of digital technology, we have a variety of sources coming, and we have data-rich community and society now, and we need to turn this rich data into summarized index that the public can accept and the decision maker can act on. So maybe I can briefly mention some of the results and research our lab has been doing. So since the early February of last year, that's before really the official start of the first outbreak in Ontario, we really started to build our transmission dynamics models based on our collaboration with the Chinese group in Xi'an University. And then we used the model to really make the forecasting of the pandemic, the disease trend in Ontario and Canada. So we are the group that correctly projected the Canadian cases could reach to about 15,000 by the end of March. This is prediction as early of pandemic, and this was adopted by various governments. We are the group that using our mathematical models and artificial intelligence to have really predicted the peak time and the case counts at the peak time for the first outbreak that was adopted by Ontario government, that was announced publicly as all the official projections from the Ontario government, and was useful to inform the public health interventions at the time. And we're also the group that using the mathematical models and kind of data from different sources to quantify the requirement in terms of testing, in terms of the contact tracing, quarantine, isolation for Canada to reopen after the first outbreak. So there's kind of quantification of the necessary conditions in terms of public health interventions was part of the federal government guideline for reopening of the Canadian economy in the summer and in the fall. And we're also the group that using the mathematical models to and the stochastic optimization techniques to inform the optimal time and optimal mode to switch to gradually reopen our economy. And this was published, it was presented to Ontario government, and it was presented to the federal government. So this was one of the cases, unfortunately, the recommendation was not adopted for different reasons. We know the government does not just consult one modeling group. And that model, if, for example, if adopted, then we will not open our economy that too drastically in the fall, and potentially we should be able to avoid the second outbreak. But again, there are different dimensions and different research groups and different sources of data to back up different recommendations. So there's always a strategy by the government to decide what kind of recommendations can and should be adopted. And we are lucky that mathematical models and analysis built from the lab has been adopted by both Ontario and federal government in many cases. And this is really part because of long-term investment by the university and by the federal government to build these connections between the mathematical modeling community and the public health communities. So Steve probably knows that there has been a long gap between the theoretical modeling study and the public health decision-making and the practice. And since 2003 SARS epidemic, I think the Canadian government and particularly York University has invested a lot of building these connections between the modeling and the decision making, and we are putting this into action this time.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. And I am going to transition over to Dr. Hoffman and a different type of data. Tell us about your experience on working with the UN group on COVID-19 recovery. And in your opinion, what should countries around the world be focused on as they prepare plans to recover from the pandemic?
Yeah, so the UN work was really interesting in the sense that it was not done for a specific country. In fact, it was the opposite. It's intended to be a research roadmap for the COVID-19 recovery for the world. And of course, the world looks very different in different places. And as a result, the kind of research and knowledge that's needed would, of course, then be different. The interesting thing, though, is in going through that process, there's actually quite a lot of similarity, though. We were actually surprised at how many of the issues that would come up in one place were actually equally relevant in a different context. And so overall, the big question and big concern that arose throughout this whole process that everyone around the world is thinking about in terms of recovery is how do we make sure that the actions taken today and the many actions and policies that are to come over the coming months, how do we make sure that they not only take us back to the way things were, how do we make sure they help us simultaneously achieve co-benefits for equity, resilience, and sustainability? And in a sense, there was this thinking that we need a quadruple bottom line. It's not enough that we act on the immediate threats. We have to make sure that we take advantage of any opportunities to simultaneously also get co-benefits for equity, co-benefits for resilience, co-benefits for sustainability. The other, I think, really interesting part of this whole process was that as much as we know how to go back to the way things were, because that's how they were, we actually don't have all the knowledge we need in order to figure out how do we do the right thing to get towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So in that respect, what it highlights is that this pandemic has been this grand revealer of lots of problems that were already there, and many of which were actually even known about. But now there's great public awareness, for example, for the extent of inequities in our society. The fact that even in a city like Toronto, which would be one of the wealthier cities in the world, it's not everyone is wealthy in the city of Toronto. Not everyone has housing, not everyone has access to nutritious food. And so even, of course, now that echoes around the world between countries and different contexts, but it highlights that we actually have real challenges in figuring out how we do this. And the good news, though, is that a lot of research, a lot of the social sciences are really all about how do we solve these underlying social drivers and social circumstances that are leading to these kind of problems. That then was the big emphasis within that UN research roadmap work. It was about how do we leverage the full range of science, including the social sciences, which traditionally have been less well-funded than other areas of science, in order to achieve the kind of social goals that we'd all love to see for the world. It's not going to be easy, but if we don't figure out how to do that, we're doomed to be going back to the way things were, which, as I mentioned earlier, was actually not that great for most of the people living on this tiny blue dot in the universe.
Thanks, Dr. Hoffman. So from the global, let's maybe look a little more local. And Dr. Mikotra, my next question is for you. You've been referred to as York's germ expert. So tell us a little bit about why vaccinations matter despite the uncertainties in being able to eliminate virus transmission.
Yes, and actually, by the way, my own family members call me germophobic. Although I try to explain I'm a germ expert. So yes, actually, so vaccines, we're quite happy that not only we have vaccines when we have more than one. And despite the uncertainty in terms of they being able to reduce or eliminate the virus transmission, it's a great thing to have them, especially now after experiencing this second wave worldwide. First of all, it will save lives. And just to keep in mind, as of today, the number of COVID cases worldwide is about 120 million. And the number of deaths is about 2.5 million. And to make that more local, in Canada, we have about more than 800,000 cases of COVID with about 22,000 of deaths. And in Ontario, obviously smaller population, but we have about 300 cases with about 7,000 deaths. So it's a huge impact. And I mean, in these numbers, you see only the deaths that were directly linked to COVID, but as a result of the pandemic itself, the impact is much larger. Second, it will ease the burden onto the healthcare system. I mean, the major issue with the COVID-19 pandemic is the how a challenge becomes in terms of taking care of the patients. We are limited by the number of the beds in the hospitals. We are limited by the number of ICU beds in the hospitals. And I'm sure all of us have become aware of how quickly this number of beds actually get filled up by the number of patients, even at the onset of the outbreak, never mind at the peak. So vaccines will definitely ease up that burden so that other people with other health conditions can be taken care of. I mean, right now, a number of elective health measures, actually, health procedures rather, cannot move ahead because of, again, a fear that these patients, once they go to hospitals or other clinical settings, may get COVID and it will impact their health. Third, it will ease up the burden on the economy. I mean, all of us are impacted indirectly by the lockdown measures. We cannot go to the restaurants. Not that there is a major impact, but in terms of those small businesses that run these restaurants and run other businesses are greatly impacted. Actually, just earlier this week, the numbers showed that the economic growth of Canada was hugely impacted by the COVID-19 to the numbers that were not seen since 1961. So despite the fact that about the uncertainties when it comes to how good these vaccines are at eliminating or reducing the virus transmission, there is huge benefits coming from these vaccines. And in a sort of a more optimistic note, when it comes to the latter impact on the virus transmission, we do have preventive measures. Face masks. I mean, my own kids actually are quite happy. They have come used to it. And actually, my younger kid actually, she says she sees a positive side of wearing a face mask. She says my face doesn't freeze when I go outside. So, but it's hand hygiene, and I'm very pleased, and I tried to sort of mention that a couple of times. I'm very pleased that this hand hygiene actually became a normal thing, because as a bacterial infection specialist, actually, I've been amazed going myself to the hospital as to how with such an ease the doctors touch the patients and so on. And I won't get into that probably, but I always was a bit agitated. So I'm glad actually this came to the forefront, because just the hand hygiene actually can prevent a number of infections, including here the novel coronavirus. Another measures is the mindfulness when we gather. You may have people with health conditions that you have to be mindful of. You may be healthy, but the other person may not be healthy. So in a way, vaccines will have all these benefits, but that aspect of virus transmission can be actually mitigated quite well with the measures that we have so far. Yes.
Thank you very much for that. My last question for the whole group is, before we get into the audience Q&A, is what I like to call the crystal ball question. So I know a lot of people in the audience are really eager to think about life post-COVID, and whether we're going back to normal. So my question for the four of you then is, what will life look like post-COVID, and how will your work help get us there? Who'd like to tackle that first?
Maybe I can have first try.
Great, thank you.
I hate to make projection first of all, Julian, because if you make a projection a positive way, then you run the risk of sacrificing academic reputation when you see the cases goes up. On that hand, if you make a projection of bad situations, then you're really struggling both intellectually and mentally. So you want your projection to be wrong. And so in terms of long-range projections, in Canada, I feel because of the anticipated mass vaccination rollout, I anticipate regular physical activities could resume by the end of the summer, and a new normal. There will be no regular normal anymore, but I think there will be permission for resume certain levels of social economic activities, including physical meeting in the class. However, this is going to be under still public health advisory on social distance and on personal hygiene, for example. And on the other hand, we are living in a globalization age, and there will be no COVID in Canada, and as there is no COVID in any corner of the world. So we should, despite of the mass vaccination anticipated in Canada, and Stephen mentioned that vaccination is not equally distributed from the different part of the country. So we should, and the world, we should really anticipate continued importation of the cases. We should anticipate local outbreak, and therefore potentially local lockdown. And however, I think second anniversary, you're going to have a much better picture.
Thanks for that. Dr. Hoffman, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is the probably the most popular question I get from journalists. So I'm not a professional crystal ball reader. Well, like Jan, who is, and the person I'd really ask. So I'm glad you went first. But I think what I will just comment on is that the crystal ball has gotten murkier. And so a year ago, I was asked a very similar question, I think also on the Scholars Hub event. And when I was telling what I thought how this pandemic would evolve in 2020, it was very predictable. And in fact, those who research pandemics like myself and others, 2020 went exactly as we would have expected. And there's movies about it, right? And it went that way. 2021 is different. And so the big unknown is the variants of concern that have emerged. And this is a normal microbiological process whereby viruses and also bacteria for other things do evolve and they can escape immune capture. And so what we're already seeing is the evolution of this virus to become both more transmissible for some variants, become more severe for other variants. And we don't know how these will evolve. What we do know is the more virus there is out there, the more chances that it has to evolve. And unfortunately, in light of the fact that we have failed to address this as a global problem, we don't know where this is going to go. And so even though there's this beautiful, positive news about we have a vaccine, and I think 2020 is the year of science, right? Developing a vaccine in a timeline like never before. It's incredible, it's inspiring. But we have likely escaped the opportunity to make use of it to fully eradicate this virus using that tool. We will likely need things like booster shots and such, if not further innovations. And so the reason I highlight all this is because I think that Jian's prediction is very right for the Canadian context. I do anticipate early fall, we will be back to a new normal, as Jian mentioned, but this pandemic will continue to rage around the world. And the more virus there is, the more opportunities for variants of concern to emerge, the more opportunities then for it to re-emerge in Canada as a threat that cannot be fully addressed by the current vaccines and for which we'll need new innovations. That really, really pushes us in Canada and other rich countries to try to think as much as possible about the global problem. Because in a sense, for example, by what we are seeing is an emergence of vaccine nationalism, each country looking after itself, which is, I get, and important, and citizens demand that. But actually, it's not looking after all of our interests, even, for example, in Canada and other countries, because if this virus is allowed to continue to rage in other countries, we're just prolonging our pain and potentially deepening it down the road.
Thanks for that. I had a feeling, Dr. Mikotra, you'd want to go next. So please, you have the floor.
Yes, please. And sorry, Murat, I'll jump just to bring a bit more optimism there. So yes, actually, the situation is as such that there are fears, especially considering the variants of concern. But there is a lot of reason to actually hope and believe that things will get better. Definitely, I don't want to go back. I mean, just as I indicated earlier, I'm happy that the hand hygiene took center stage. So, and making people aware of that, yes, it's okay to take care of yourself, but you got to be mindful of the others. So I don't want to go back to sort of, the situation where we sort of believed in science and we thought it will take care of everything, which it can, but we have to do our part. So there is definitely reasons to be hopeful. And so we don't have one vaccine. We have two novel vaccines. And we have AstraZeneca was also approved in Canada. In US, they got the Johnson & Johnson. There is two more vaccines, the Novavax. And the reason I'm mentioning them actually is that yes, there is this issue of the impact that they have on transmission of the virus, and there is the issue of the efficacy rate. But all of them actually are very good when it comes to hospitalizations and deaths. I mean, with no doubt, even when it comes to the virus of concern. Another reason, there are many others, but I'm just going to focus primarily into another reason of hope is that yes, microorganisms evolve, and they are much better at evolving because they have occupied the earth for billions of years. So that's why we are where we are now, because of these microorganisms and their ability to evolve. However, when it comes to the pathogens, they do sort of this evolution goes through competing processes. One of them, for example, in case of the virus, is the eagerness, if you will, to evade the immune system, but also the ability to infect. And these can be two competing processes when it comes to evolution. And just the other day, actually, I was quite pleased to see, I mean, we see this in bacteria often. I was pleased to see that a number of scientists looking at the sequences of many variants of the virus, they do see a saturation, in the sense that these two processes of the ability to evade the system sort of comes to be counteractive when it comes to the ability to infect the host. And they do see that all around the world, the same mutations are popping up, no new ones. Now, what does it mean? Shall we open up and then go to bars and have fun? No. But in the sense that there is hope for more optimism. And that means that we have to stick with these preventive measures. We have to do our part in terms of those that can and are eligible for to get the vaccines now, and not to be fearful, because that vaccine hesitation can play a big role in terms of science doing its job, technology doing its job, and then we stop there. So I see the future being quite bright. Coming fall for Canada, US seems to be brighter coming May, it seems like. But there is indeed a lot of hope. And what that goes to say that when the public does its part in terms of following the guidelines of the healthcare providers and the experts and so on, and the science does its part, and we are all on the same page, definitely even this pandemic actually can be curbed, not necessarily come to an end entirely, but at least can be under control, so all of us can go on and do our everyday activities and so on. But be better at hand washing and be mindful of other people that surround us.
Thank you for that. Dr. Kristal, did you want to add your predictions?
Well, I kind of agree with all my colleagues. The only prediction that I have is that in terms of in the new normal, the people will demand more evidence-based decision making. All of us became the consumers of dashboards in the news programs. Every politician is showing some kind of a dashboard or some kind of an image that shows numbers. And hopefully this will get into our DNA, that we will start making decisions based upon facts rather than feelings or how we, feel towards something. That evidence-based decision making might be helpful as a society at large.
That's great, and I hope you're right.
So.
So now it's time to get into some Q&A from the audience that we're live with today. And I see that there's quite a few questions there. So audience members, if you have anything that you want to ask, please use that Q&A button below, and I'll do my best to get to as many as we can. I'm going to start with, no surprise here, a question about the vaccines. Tom Chow asks, after getting the vaccine, can you still become infected without suffering any symptoms? And can you infect others?
I can jump in. So it depends actually which vaccine are you taking, and what time do you have in mind in terms of how quickly you may get infected, or what is a chance to getting sick. So as you may be aware of, when it comes to the messenger RNA vaccines and the AstraZeneca one, there are 2 doses. The schedule is a 2-dose schedule. And the studies show, especially with the messenger RNA vaccines, that the efficacy rate right after the first dose is not huge. It's about 50% to 70%. And when you do take the second dose, at this 21 days or 28 days, depending on the Pfizer or Moderna, the efficacy rate goes to 95 for Pfizer, 94 for Moderna. So you are guaranteed in a way that protective effect of the vaccine after the second dose, and at least a couple of weeks after the second dose, because that's how these efficacy rates were determined during the final of the clinical trials. So and to make the point shorter, after the first dose, there is no guarantee that you are protected, and at what level. But certainly there is no guarantee of you not being infected, because that's where the uncertainty, as was mentioned earlier, is that it is expected that all the vaccines will impact the virus transmission, but it is not known at how much. So yes, you may get infected, and yes, after the first dose of the vaccine, you may fall sick, because it's a second dose, especially when it comes to messenger RNA, that provides that real strong response from the immune system. When it comes to AstraZeneca, the same philosophy goes there as well. It's a 2-dose vaccine. Yes, there are issues when it comes to for how long the second dose can be delayed and what is the protection. But I will stick with how the clinical trials were done. and how the efficacy rates were determined, that the second dose really gives you the protection that these vaccines claim to provide. And when it comes to virus transmission, studies shows that yes, they can reduce, but you certainly are likely to get infected, and are likely, because when you get infected, it means that in your body the virus replicates, the numbers go up, and those virus particles can go to somebody else, either through the respiratory droplets most likely, but often also through the touching of the contaminated surfaces.
Thank you. Dr.
And during that period, keep the face masks, hand hygiene, and avoid gatherings.
Thank you. Dr. Wu, did you want to address the question?
I think I wrote the article along with Dasantina and on this, and I fully agree with what she said. So, and I think you still need to keep the personal hygiene to a level that before that is different from the before the COVID pandemic, regardless.
Thank you. Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Kristal, did you want to chime in? You're good? Oh.
No, I think it was said. I think the one thing I'll just briefly say, it's for that reason that vaccines is definitely the reason to be optimistic right now, but it won't be a panacea in solving the full range of challenge. And, you know, with current production of vaccine at the current levels, it'll take something like 7 years to vaccinate the entire world. And so that's why maybe I'm a little bit less optimistic than Dasantila, but for at least from a Canadian perspective, I mean, the number one thing we can do is to get vaccinated as soon as we can. And then we have to then continue all the processes that Dasantila and Gian and others have highlighted, washing hands, masks and such, because yes, it can still be transmissible. Yeah. The good news, though, is the vaccine, as Dasantila emphasized, and let me re-emphasize that, very, very effective in terms of basically just eliminating the need for hospitalization and eliminating death. Nothing is guaranteed in life, but this will be the best way that people can protect themselves and their families and everyone they come into contact with.
Thanks. So my next question is about herd immunity. And actually there's several questions about herd immunity. First of all, what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated in order to achieve herd immunity, and whether that will be effective? And on a more global level, Dr. Hoffman, you know, what is it going to take for herd immunity to be achieved around the world? Because you spoke earlier about what a risk this is if we don't have vaccination on a more widespread level.
Maybe Gian, I'm happy to chime in, but Gian, you might, or Dasantila, you might be the best people to talk about herd immunity.
Okay, you're right.
Context.
I will take on first. I know Dasantina can always provide better assessment. This is it's a number game from Tom Chow, and I feel that 80% of vaccine coverage, with that coverage, what happens to the remaining 20 and 30% is a typical question. So unfortunately, the COVID-19, the transmissibility is much higher than others, including the flu. And now because of new strains, the variants, then the transmissibility is significantly increased by many other new strains. So unfortunately, given all this, the remaining 20 to 30% of non-vaccinated population will remain to be susceptible. That's why I'm saying that you should expect local outbreak, and the chance of getting COVID-19 for those non-vaccinated individuals is higher than you getting flu during a regular flu season.
Yes, I agree actually with Gian completely. And just to be a bit more optimistic in case, so the approach, especially when it comes to the COVID vaccines, it's slightly different in the sense that the countries are focusing in vaccinating the most vulnerable ones, those that are at higher risk, as well as those at the frontliner. people. So, and that in a way actually will protect this group of population that obviously is at higher risk. And so the hope is that the 20% that will remain non-vaccinated for different reasons, and I know here I'm being more optimistic, but is that they'll be probably more healthy. And again, 80% is quite a large number. What that indicates is that out of 180 are vaccinated. So those individuals that may not get vaccinated for underlying health reasons, or probably get vaccinated but do not gain a vaccine-induced immunity, in a way will be protected by hopefully the people that surround them that are vaccinated. So especially in terms of, again, as I indicated earlier, there are data, actually even real world data, wide data, that show that the vaccines do contribute to the reduction of the virus transmission. So, so in the sense that 80% is a very good number to achieve in terms of herd immunity. And it's also a very good number to achieve protection of those that need the most for the reasons that I mentioned before. So certainly whomever you are in contact with, do encourage them to get vaccinated. They may not see the reason why, but they will be able to protect the others that they surround or are in contact with. And as I indicated earlier, I am hoping actually that these preventive measures will remain in place, not necessarily for everybody, but especially those that are more vulnerable, especially those that cannot get vaccinated for health issues, but also are vaccinated, but they don't mount, their body doesn't mount an immune response. So we will be more aware of as to whom we come in contact with and protect them from this virus.
I can add then, just from the global perspective, there's I mean, the reality is we don't know the exact number, and we won't have an exact number at any point given the variants are. We don't know which one will sort of emerge in that and how they'll continue to evolve. But we will know a lot more in the near-term future. I think that's a lot of epidemiologists' eyes are on Israel right now. So Israel's a country, 55% of people in Israel have received at least one dose of this vaccine. And indeed, I mean, I think a lot of people have been wondering, how is it possible that Israel got access to so much vaccine product? And the answer is simple, that Israeli government made their society available as essentially a clinical trial for the Pfizer company to get further data like this. So there's essentially there's a massive scientific experiment happening in Israel right now with and with their electronic health records and such. They have much better data than we could possibly have at a societal level in Canada, such that some of these questions we should be able to answer. And the good news is that so right now at 55% of the population having at least one dosage of this vaccine in Israel, already transmission rates have gone way down. So it does actually really reinforce what Dasancila was highlighting, is that the important role that herd immunity could play. What the exact number is, we won't know, but we will know a lot more by looking at the Israeli data, which will end up being some of the best data that we could possibly generate in a pandemic like this.
Thank you. Dr. Kristal, did you want to talk a little bit about this, the predictive data? Oh, you're on mute.
The models get stronger and stronger. I actually would like to take the next question about the new normal, because there will be some interesting things that we would like to talk about the new normal, or if we will ever feel how this new normal, or we will have any outbreak like this happening in the future.
Yes, please go ahead.
There's something called supply chain resiliency. Because what we have experienced in our daily lives is that our supply chains, when the shutdown occurred, the supply chains cut off, right? And now we are learning to deal with this. And then the concept of supply chain resiliency is building enough buffers within your supply chain in order to deal with disruptions that might occur in your supply chain. Now, with this pandemic, what we are learning is we also need to build buffers in our society, one way or the other. And that will make the difference for us as a society to deal with this one and the future ones in the future. How much the size of the buffers, the frequency of the buffers, where we are going to put these buffers in our society, and how that will impact, the budgets, the social aspects of it, the training, education, all of these things will be changed if we want to prevent these things. Maybe my colleagues can talk about it, but these social buffers will be the next big thing if we want to be successful in dealing this pandemic and the future pandemics.
I'm happy to weigh in briefly, Julie, if that's, yeah, I think that when we think of the kind of threats that we're seeing today with COVID, this was entirely predictable. People all of us have been thinking about these types of things and have made research careers planning for something like this. Although I have to say it's a lot less fun being a researcher of a pandemic during a pandemic than beforehand. But I've become more popular at virtual dinner parties. My point though is, the best thing to do to be able to address a pandemic is actions that have to be taken before the pandemic starts. And probably the number one thing would be investing in a robust system for public health. I think when you look at it, that's not the only factor that's going to determine whether a country does well in a pandemic, but it's really hard to do well in a pandemic if you don't have a good system for public health. In our country, those choices get made every time a budget gets passed by our federal and provincial legislatures. At the federal level, investment after SARS 2003 went up quite significantly and has been maintained. The same is not the case for provinces across our country. In fact, in the province where York University is, massive budget cuts for public health came into effect literally the day before this pandemic was alerted to the World Health Organization. So on January 1st, 2020, the day before this pandemic, you had huge layoffs at public health across Ontario. And so imagine you have a cadre of people who really passionate about public health. A lot of them get fired. And if they don't get fired, their colleagues just got fired. And then suddenly they're being asked to mobilize work around the clock in order to address this new emerging pandemic. And they want to rehire people, but everyone's trying to hire those same people all at once. There's a global shortage of public health professionals. And so I hate to be a little critical of a province, particularly given all of us have received a very kind award from a minister of the Ontario government. But good friends and supporters highlight challenging aspects of things when they happen. That's my intention here. And of course, I think everyone in the Ontario government probably recognizes this as a mistake. How could one not? So nothing new there.
Other thoughts?
Well, I can from the health aspect in terms of science and research, but another I guess we realized, or the federal government realized a mistake was not having capacity to produce vaccines, and how that's possible. A decade ago or so, Canada actually was one of the top countries when it comes to vaccine development. So how that is possible, but I guess a problem that the pandemic has revealed is that the reliance on sort of the medications that we have now to cover for everything, but they don't. When you get a new pathogen, no matter how much drugs you may have available, it may not necessarily work against that pathogen. So you always have to have a backup plan, meaning that, okay, do we have capacity to produce this? Do we have capacity to produce face masks? So with the 2003 and 2009 short-lived pandemic, if that can be called like that, I was quite surprised to see that the federal government had decided to just have no vaccination production capacity at all. Given actually that, again, Canada is quite well known when it comes to vaccine development. So this is what this pandemic has pretty much taught us, that you cannot assume that things will be the way they have been for some time, especially in this global lifestyle that we are undertaking nowadays, and especially how important it is to have things in-house rather than having to go outside abroad and look for masks, gloves, and other things. So I hope this is a lesson that, you know, when it comes to the healthcare, you cannot go to the cycle. I mean, we know science goes through cycles as well. One type of research is funded more than the other once period, and then you cannot afford that. You cannot afford in such times that we live, such global lifestyle and interaction with different countries. So hopefully that will be changed.
Thank you. Any further thoughts? Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Judith Esser asks, what are your predictions in terms of global cooperation for post-pandemic resource sharing in view of the have versus have not political realities?
I'm not the researcher who does research in this area, but I have a personal opinion. So this is not a, you know, researcher opinion. But if I were to bet on, I will bet highly on countries not collaborating with each other. The more I read, the more I feel bad about our future. I don't think that it will be high levels of collaboration, but hopefully I will be completely wrong in this prediction.
Maybe I can take the opportunity to update the alumni that York just recently established a new Canada-Africa consortium on artificial intelligence to inform COVID-19 recovery. This is funded by IDRC with participants from many countries in the Africa continental, and we did that. I think the university realized and the Canadian government realized that, again, it's a global pandemic. So unless the problem is resolved, it's addressed globally, we will not have public health in Canada. So this is something I think the global collaboration, very glad Steve is really playing a leadership role here, but I think it's something we have not emphasized enough and for this pandemic, and this is something I think the country as a whole should know.
Yeah, I'm happy to also weigh in. I mean, ultimately, all of us are going to be footing the bill, and the bill will be continue to be accumulating for quite some years. Part of that is of how all countries, all societies around the world were insufficiently prepared for these kind of threats. And I think when we think of then the recovery, that's why resilience is such a key part. And as Dasansila highlighted, we can't be thinking of merely planning for future threats of the kinds we've already seen or just experienced. We need to be paying for the full range of threats that can come our way. And societies don't have a very good track record around the world of doing that. So I think that is a reason to be less optimistic. But I do want to be optimistic because that is more my nature. And I feel like during this session thus far, I've been more on the gloomy side. And I am really excited when I think about how all of humanity came together and developed not one, not two, I mean, several vaccine candidates that are now, or more than candidates that have been gone through clinical trials and are now already being used to address a problem. That really highlights that global collaboration can work. Now, Murat highlights how difficult it is and his own skepticism of it. So I think we should all be a little skeptical. But, you know, the scientific collaboration that emerged is just incredible. And it really highlights that we can solve these really big, terrifying challenges that face us if we have the right mechanism, if we have enough political will, and if we invest accordingly in it. I think there's dark clouds, though, ahead of us. And as much as the vaccine science was, I think, the hero, anyone involved in that, heroes of 2020, I think some of the villains of 2021 are then those who aren't ensuring and aren't taking the steps to ensure that that vaccine is then being able to be used by all societies around the world. And whether we get through that, this is a little bit of a test for, yes, it's in this context, it's today's pandemic, but it's a little bit of a test of how do we work together across countries to solve these big challenges, climate change, the oceans, outer space, and hopefully we'll be able to learn something from it.
And I will add a little bit more into that optimism. So in a way, there are challenges ahead of us in order to be able to, especially have the governments sort of, work together. But we as a scientists, we do that. I mean, I collaborate with the researcher in India. And again, it is our sort of our research that takes us wherever we can in order to make things happen. Another positive point that I want to make is that the fact that countries like India have become powerhouses to produce vaccine. Obviously, China has been there, and South Africa hopefully will be brought in. It makes these sort of the ability to be more global a bit more easier, in the sense that empowering other countries to be able to face such situations is very important. And this has been done with the work of Bill Gates and other philanthropists. So therefore, we don't just have to rely on the governments. We know it's a bureaucratic process, and bureaucracy is slow. So therefore, we have to rely on ourselves, like we scientists, researchers, pushing, and because we understand things better in a way, because we do that, pushing our research further, and and lobbying for what needs to be important, but also collaborating as we are doing with everywhere around the globe, because that empowers those countries to face these situations actually, and probably be leaders in the future in situations like this.
Thank you. I love the idea of ending on a high note. So let's do that. Let's talk more silver linings. I'm sorry, my cat is demanding my attention right now, so I apologize for anything you hear or see. So let's talk silver linings. What are the takeaways that you hope we've learned, the positive lessons that we can bring into the future, whatever the future looks like?
In my case, as a humanity, we learned resilience. Businesses learn to be resilient as well. That is a huge gain. We are adapting to changes, both in terms of the workforce, but it is also the responses that you would see from the businesses. They were able to adapt to changes. Nowadays, everybody uses some form of DocuSign, one way or the other, okay? So that's 2 years later, it's only, people who are in the know would use it. Now everybody uses DocuSign, everybody uses Zoom. So the resiliency, being able to change, and businesses reacting to this change is a positive. The digital transformation and then use of data making decisions is a very positive change in my opinion. And we will be using more and more data and analytics and AI in the coming years. That I see as a positive change.
Maybe I can take on this. So again, I just want to share some of the progress at York, and I think it's relevant to the issues that Julian just raised. Actually started before the pandemic. There's a pan-university research group getting together, talk about the systemic risk for disaster and emergency. And so I think the COVID-19 strongly enhanced that concept and the need of recognize this cascading compound effect of the pandemic. Something that you do today has significant impact onto the future perspective. And I think one of the positive signs is really now the society started to realize the importance to address its systemic risk and to really pay attention to a kind of transformation in terms of disaster emergency management from that perspective. And the university is really building a larger campus research initiative to really bring all the stakeholders together, bring all the expertise together to address the systemic risk of disaster emergency. I think this is something we named, and I think something coming out of good come out of this experience.
I love ending on silver linings because I think there actually are quite a few. I'll give one personal, one global or policy related. On a personal front, I'm really excited about the virtual healthcare. I mean, I remember growing up, so my mom having to take me to this doctor's appointment, that dentist appointment, and I was so lucky having access to healthcare, but also very lucky to have a mom who was able to take off work and go with me, and really disruptive for a whole lot of people. When you think about the future, virtual care, healthcare will not only make access to healthcare that much more accessible and convenient for all of us, but also there's a lot of people out there who actually can't go to the doctor's office or the dentist as often as they should, particularly kids. If, for example, their parents have work obligations and need to go to work in order to put food on the table or don't have any flexibility with their jobs. Virtual care, of course, doesn't fully solve it, but it actually could end up opening up huge opportunities for equity, including for kids who don't have, don't have the unfortunate situation that I had growing up. On a more global policy perspective, I think one very big silver lining is around, are we going to get the changes needed to make us more resilient for the future? And so I think what we know is from the political science literature is that these kind of big transformative changes to global governance only come about after a shocking event. I personally was hoping that the Ebola outbreak in West Africa was going to be sufficiently shocking that it would have jolted our global governance systems to make big changes that we need. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And I remember I wrote an article, it was published, asking how many people have to die in order to achieve the kind of global governance changes that are needed to prepare for that next inevitable future pandemic. My hope, silver lining, my hope would be that this tragedy that we're seeing right now with COVID-19, it must be enough. I really hope it's enough of a tragedy in order to inspire the kind of changes to make sure we don't see this happening again. And if it doesn't, then that would be really a reason to not be optimistic, but I am optimistic. I think we will see big changes afterwards.
Thanks, Dr. Hoffman. So I think I'll wrap up from here, unless there's final thoughts from the panelists.
I could say from the sort of being more wet lab scientist. So certainly what this, another thing that the pandemic showed is that we are so interdependent, in the sense that we depend on each other greatly, not only protecting ourselves, but also protecting our loved ones. And it showed that this individualistic lifestyle that we have adopted, meaning taking care of our little bubble, it won't function anymore in the future, in the sense that the way your neighbor behaves definitely impacts you. And also it showed that, yes, we can rely on the science to make us feel better, get better, but science won't be there for every single occasion. And what I mean by that actually is that we're so much used to, you get sick, you go to the doctor, you get a pill, and then you want to get better. No, what this pandemic showed is that you got to be patient. You got to follow much more simpler, even preventive measures to protect yourself. You don't just have to go out there, get wild, get sick, and then expect the medicine to come to you and you get better. So that showed. So this pandemic showed that we got to be patient. Just simply hand washing. Again, I want to come back to that. It's so important. And having said that, what is important is educating the public. Not only that, yes, these medicines, medications, or chemotherapeutic treatments are available, but you can do much more to reduce the burden on the hospitals, but also in the budget itself. It's much more expensive to go and buy a medicine rather than washing your hands and preventing, getting infected with an infectious agent. So I'm hoping actually, and York actually has done quite a great job. I myself, a couple of years back, had to go to community and give a talk about superbugs. And I didn't realize how much community was interested to learn. And I didn't realize how much they didn't know. Simple thing. And they were happy to learn that, yes, washing their hands, it can prevent or cut down the number of infectious diseases. I mean, these were elderly people, so obviously they're quite invested in that. And I realized, simple things like these educating the public what are the potentials that can happen, situations, it can make them more active socially and politically as well, but also it can help in them being more protected against these infectious diseases. So
thanks so much. We'll leave it at that. Everyone, wash your hands, wear a mask. So thank you all very, very much for participating today. Dr. Mikotra, Dr. Hoffman, Dr. Kristal, Dr. Wu, really grateful for your time as always. You can feel free to turn off your cameras and mics now as I wrap up, but thank you for being here. Before we say goodbye to you in the audience, I want to thank you as well for the time you spent with us today. And I do have one last question for you. So again, in that Q&A function in Zoom or in the Facebook comments, tell me what aspects of today's presentation you found most meaningful or helpful. So please, before you go, do take a moment to respond. As I mentioned at the top of the event, this video will be posted to YouTube, so you can go ahead and share that with family and friends. Also join our LinkedIn group and follow us on Facebook by searching York University Alumni. We're on Twitter and Instagram at YorkU Alumni. And we'll be back next week with another installation of Scholars Hub, Building Resiliency Skills. And this will be a session about the impact of the stress on all of us. And in keeping with International Women's Day earlier that week, our guest will be Dr. Louise Hartley, who's the director of York University's Psychology Clinic, and she'll be focusing specifically on the impact of stress on women. Then on March 24th, we have another Scholars Hub event in partnership with the Canada-UK Foundation and taking more of a global look with Dr. James Orbinski, who's a leading scholar in global health. So stay tuned to learn more about that. As always, all of our events are available on our website, yorku.ca, /alumni and friends/events. And you can always reach us by email with any of your feedback at alumni@yorku.ca. Thank you once again for your time with us today. Please stay safe, and I hope to see you again soon.